Hello everyone, this is Major Markham, your historian for the 63rd Readiness Division, and for today I wanted to discuss the nature of transformation within our organization. As many of you may know, the Army is undergoing what the Department of Defense and the Army refers to as the Army Transformation Initiative. While transformations naturally create uncertainty, which can be concerning for some, our history gives us an opportunity to reflect and provide guidance as we move forward. That is because for every transformation we have undergone as a division, it has been for some purpose tied to national or strategic objectives that would naturally be controversial for some as people argue the pros and cons of each potential change. One of the most prevalent questions that members of our organization have asked is tied to how a World War II infantry division in the regular army became an administrative division in the Army Reserves, overseeing and supporting units in the 7 states of the American Southwest. The answer to that is through a series of transformations over time. In this presentation, we'll cover those transformations as well as many of the concerns and motivations that compelled those changes. Hopefully, this will show that change is not uncommon for our organization. On June 15, 1943, the 63rd Infantry Division was one of many new infantry divisions stood up to meet the need for more infantry in the European theater of operations during World War II. While it would not begin deploying until November 1944, the reason for the delay involved the cannibalization of officers and NCOs, namely infantry and artillery, by the Army to act as replacements for divisions already engaged in combat. This caused significant morale issues as the unit was prevented from advancing through its collective training, and many soldiers saw their bonds disrupted as friends left and new recruits came to fill the vacancies. To quote remarks from Major General Lewis Hibbs, our first commander,
I wish you to take an early opportunity. Some of you may be able to do it Monday, to call your officers and non-commissioned officers together for the purpose of going over the following with them. The War Department policy concerning overseas replacements being taken from the units, which has resulted in the withdrawal of these men who are leaving us, and the reasons behind this policy, namely, that they desire men who are more thoroughly trained for use in their prospective operations. The fact that this is a logical policy. Further, the fact that they take them from us and from a number of other divisions is merely a matter of its being necessary. And after all, we are all in the same war.
However, by June 1944, after the landings in Normandy, the need for infantry to help cover the expanding territory that would occur compelled the Army to cease cannibalizing our division and allow the 63rd to finish its training and begin deploying. However, the desperate need for infantry compelled the Army to have the division ship off its infantry regiments well ahead of the rest of the division so that they can reinforce the front lines as soon as possible. As a result, the 253rd, 254th, and 255th Infantry Regiments, alongside a small headquarters element, which formed a task force led by Assistant Division Commander Brigadier General Frederick Harris, arrived in southern France in early December and was attached as reserves to other combat divisions already on the front lines of 7th Army. While this allowed our infantry to arrive and take position just in time to repel the German attack of Operation Nordwind and to support the defeat of the German 19th Army in the Colmar Pocket, there were nonetheless issues and lessons learned from this piecemeal employment of our division into combat.
It went on to make an excellent combat record, proving to our satisfaction that the difficulties experienced as a task force were chargeable to the makeshift nature of the organization, and not to the character or training of our troops. Some of the lessons learned from the operation are: 1. Infantry regiments, separated from the normal supporting arms and services of their parent division, will generally experience great difficulty in their supply and maintenance. 2. Task forces organized from units which have had no training together are likely to be ineffective fighting teams. 3. In reasonably static situations, the most effective method of employment of a separate infantry regiment is to attach it to a division. The supporting arms and services of the division can support a 4th regiment in such situations without undue strain. 4. A division cannot effectively support and employ more than one extra regiment except under most unusual circumstances.
After the rest of the division arrived in early February of 1945, the unit was able to consolidate its organization and fight as a cohesive division by March, where it pierced the Siegfried Line, conducted 7 river crossings, captured numerous towns, and liberated a subcamp of the Kaufering concentration camp system. The division would only conduct occupation duties in Bavaria for a short time until it was redeployed back stateside and deactivated in September of 1945. The Army, of course, was downsizing after the end of the war, as the need for millions of uniformed service members would no longer be necessary. That is, until it was needed in the 1950s, as the influence of the Soviet Union, Communist China, and the Korean War compelled the Army to increase its numbers and modernize its forces. As a result, the pre-existing 13th Armored Division of the Organized Reserves, based out of Los Angeles, California, was reflagged and transformed into the 63rd Infantry Division of the U.S. Army Reserves in 1952. During the early 1950s, the division would serve primarily as an undermanned division of the Army Reserves, which would develop a skilled cadre in preparation for full mobilization after having its ranks filled with volunteers and draftees. As a result, the division could not conduct collective unit training as there were not enough junior enlisted soldiers to actually engage in anything greater than team or squad level tasks. As a result, the G3 redesigned their training program to focus on small group and individual specialties to ensure that their cadre was ready for fillers.
Mission of the 63rd, if summoned to duty, is to expand quickly from its present cadre skeleton status, to add and train the manpower that is the muscle and strength of a fighting machine. In the past, training emphasis has been on the unit, with officers and men combining as platoons and companies to carry out group assignments. This year there will be, instead, numerous small groups and even individuals studying specialties and learning to teach them to others.
The division transformed again in 1959 to undertake the Army's new reorganization of the Combat Infantry Division, ROC-ID, also colloquially known as the Pentomic Division. Whereas the previous triangular divisions of World War II were designed for conventional wars, the Pentomic Division was designed for an infantry division to maneuver, fight, and survive on nuclear battlefields.
The long-awaited announcement that the division is to go Pentomic came from 6th Army in February. Officially, the division soon will become 5 battle groups instead of 3 regiments, plus the streamlined complement of supporting combat and service elements considered essential to fight an atomic age war. All 10 Army Reserve divisions in the nation were ordered to follow the regular Army in the ROC-ID reorganization.
The subsequent Berlin crisis of 1961, which saw the reserves mobilized to Europe as a stopgap measure, while the active army worked to activate, equip, man, train, and deploy 2 new active combat divisions, caused concern for Secretary of Defense McNamara due to the reserve's poor readiness and defective personnel management system. Part of the issues faced by the reserves was the lack of funding and reduced prioritization in the fielding of new equipment to meet Pentomic structure, and this saw the reserves in a midst of transformation right when it needed to deploy forces to Europe. Additionally, the regular army was already in the process of transitioning away from the Pentomic organization as the government saw its weaknesses in fighting conventional wars. The regular army had already converted to the Reorganization Objective Army Division, ROAD, structure, and the Army Reserves, including the 63rd, would begin to follow suit in 1963. What is important to note is that while the 63rd Infantry Division was not directly involved in the mobilization during the Berlin crisis, because these issues so greatly tarnished McNamara's views on the reserves, he spent the rest of the first half of the 1960s trying to rid the Army of its reserves and merge them into the National Guard, so that the Army only consisted of the active regular Army and the National Guard as its sole reserve component. Congress would not allow this, partly because many congressmen were Army Reservists themselves, but also because the Army Reserves was one of the last elements of the Army that Congress had effective influence over, as the regular Army was firmly under the control of the executive branch, and the governors controlled their respective state guards. While McNamara could not legally disestablish the reserves, he could reform it, so he decided to inactivate all 6 of the reserve's combat divisions, including the 63rd. In December 1965, the 63rd Infantry Division would be deactivated, but there had been question of what to do with the glut of reservists that now had no unit to call home and no duty positions to fill. As a result, the reserves established new Reinforcement Training Units, RTUs, which are basically organizations for the purpose of allowing individual reservists to drill and maintain readiness while awaiting duty positions elsewhere or awaiting potential call-ups for reserve units that needed fillers when they mobilized. Since the existing RTUs could not support the large increased number of reservists that had been effectively made homeless, the Army took some of the headquarters of these deactivated units and turned them into RTUs. As a result, the headquarters elements of the 63rd Infantry Division became the 63rd Reinforcement Training Unit, or 63rd Infantry Division RTU, as it was sometimes referred to internally, and the future was uncertain for many within our organization.
13 months have passed since the deactivation of the 63rd Infantry Division, one of the finest reserve combat divisions that ever existed in the United States Army. In the past year, I have met many former 63rd Infantry Division personnel, enlisted men and officers. Most expressed a wish that they were once again a member of the old division, where the requirements were often quite tough. But the individual had a feeling of belonging to an organization with a mission, through which he developed a personal sense of responsibility and accomplishment. Despite memories and wishes, however, our obligation is the present and future. Time and regulations take their toll. As the months pass, many of us will no longer be active participants in the reserve program. It is our duty to make certain that those who follow develop into competent and conscientious reservists, true citizen soldiers.
Another transformation was on the horizon, however, as the beef between McNamara, Congress, and the reserves was hashed out since the deactivation of our division. Their solution? Revitalize the Army Reserves, provide better funding, better equipment, and more support overall. One such course of action was the plan to establish regional commands that could provide proper administrative oversight of the disparate reserve units throughout the country and help them in their readiness to support the new total Army concept. These commands, called Army Reserve Commands, or ARCOMs, would need to be stood up, and when peering over the American Southwest, they looked to who could provide administrative oversight over Southern California, Nevada, and Arizona. Lo and behold, the 63rd RTU was in prime position to stand up and meet that need. So, in 1968, they transformed again into the 63rd ARCOM. Now, this period of the 63rd ARCOM would constitute the longest lasting period without any significant transformation of our structure or our purpose. The units we provided oversight for, from 1968 through 1995, participated in numerous overseas missions, provided relief stateside along with the National Guard, and since our footprint includes Hollywood, California, our presence has been felt in numerous movie and TV productions.
Shit! You see him?
All right. Move your team 2 meters to the left. That's it. Stop. Touch that light-colored grass. Sniper at your feet.
Nothing here, Sergeant Major.
What did he just say?
I don't know, something about his clock being broken. Damn it! Forget it. They're gonna send a tow truck. Guys, on my signal, everybody scream like crazy. Make them think we got 50 guys up here, okay? 1, and go! We scared them! I can't believe we scared them! Yeah, don't mess with the Glendale Reservists! Behind 2 weeks a year, 1 week in a month, we're the few! We're the proud! We're the water boys! Oh, stuck! Get through!
Most importantly, the 63rd ARCOM was critical in ensuring the readiness of our reserve units for support of Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm, which showed actual proof of validity of the total army concept that shaped the ARCOM's foundation. However, with the success in the Persian Gulf, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the strength of America's influence throughout the 1990s, the Department of Defense saw a new vision of the future, one that didn't need a military design to fight a major war in Europe. One such vision was for an Army Reserve that was more engaged with civilian agencies to provide support. The 63rd ARCOM was already providing support for counter-drug operations along the border with Border Patrol and drug enforcement, and provided disaster relief for the Northridge earthquake that hit Los Angeles in 1994. The ARCOM structure didn't allow for ease of cooperation between the Army Reserves and the civilian agencies we were increasingly supporting. So, in 1995, the ARCOMs were restructured into regional support commands that were aligned with FEMA boundaries. The 63rd ARCOM was thus transformed into the 63rd RSC, aligned with FEMA's 9th region that covered all of California, Nevada, and Arizona, but still providing administrative oversight over the reserve units in these states. This iteration worked well until September 11th, 2001, and the beginning of the global war on terror.
Time, distance, capacity of ports and airfields, and amount of lift, number of airplanes by type, number of ships by type, capacity to carry the modern increments of war, including resupply. So it became clear we've got to go ahead and mobilize in large numbers to get this done. And so by the 1st of January, on the 31st of December, the report I get every day from the USARC had us at about 9,927. We had 9,927 soldiers in the Army Reserve mobilized. Within 3 months, by the 31st of March, our number was 69,800. Shot up like that. And we were unprepared for that. Totally unprepared.
Now that the United States was becoming increasingly involved throughout the globe, its military arm of national power was being stretched, and the Army Reserves and National Guard were being leveraged to such a great extent and on such a persistent basis that existing readiness structures no longer sufficed. For the reserves, they needed additional personnel and administrative functions that could facilitate these constant mobilizations of reserve units to support the global war on terror. And in 2003, the RSC would be converted into Regional Readiness Commands, and the 63rd RSC became the 63rd RRC. Now, there were continued issues with aligning Army Reserve units with the Army campaign plans and modularization initiatives. And to solve this, they sought to bring back the RSCs, at least in name, and consolidate the RRCs. As a result, in 2008, the 63rd RRC was merged with the 90th RRC, and the reserve units that occupy the 7 states that make up the area of responsibility from California to Arkansas fell under the Combat Support and Combat Service Support umbrella of the 63rd RSC. In October 2018, the 63rd RSC was redesignated as the 63rd Readiness Division, as it is today. One potential reason for this change was that it represented a shift in capacity. There was a new need to enhance the organization's ability to train, equip, and support individuals and units for potential short-notice mobilizations, and the RSCs were structured to provide predictable rotational training. The Readiness Division arguably could provide that. Ready Force X was training the reserves for just that need.
Rather than building readiness for scheduled overseas rotations with long mobilization lead times, as the reserve did for operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, Ready Force X builds pools of units with high demand capabilities that are able to deploy quickly, some with as little as 30 days notice. These units receive priority status for training and equipment. In all, Ready Force X includes about a third of the force. Examples of high-demand capabilities include transportation, cyber, aviation, medical, engineers, and military police.
Now, all of these transformations, the 1943 activation, then cannibalization and task force employment of the 63rd Infantry Division in World War II, followed by its deactivation in 1945, the 1952 reflagging of the 13th Armored Division as the 63rd Infantry Division of the U.S. Army Reserves, the slow transition to the Pentomic structure in the late 1950s, the near immediate transition to the ROAD structure in the early 1960s, the 1965 deactivation of the 63rd Infantry Division and the establishment of the 63rd Reinforcement Training Unit, the 1968 standing up of the 63rd Army Reserve Command as an administrative organization over the American Southwest, the 1995 transition to the 63rd Regional Support Command along FEMA boundaries to better engage in interagency support, the 2003 transition into the 63rd Regional Readiness Command to better facilitate the constant deployment of reserve units during the Global War on Terror, the 2008 transition to a consolidated 63rd Regional Support Command covering 7 states of the American Southwest in order to better align the reserves to campaign plans and modularization. And finally, the 2018 transition into the 63rd Readiness Division to enhance the ability of our organization to provide the necessary support to improve training readiness for more spontaneous mobilizations. Our division has undergone numerous transformations in its history, each for their own reason, and each had their pros and cons tied around meeting national and strategic objectives that leaders at the time had argued about. Now, with the current Army Transformation Initiative, there will undoubtedly be changes to some degree. Whether or not it is significant enough to affect the structure of our division as it has in the past, or if it is only a minor adjustment to achieve a leaner and more lethal organization, only history will tell. Thank you for your time.